improved public education. In fact, in most cases, it has decreased the educational opportunities for young people.
There's no question. The amount of money that's been taken away from the public schools to go to the community schools has been a major hit on public education. So it's decreased the opportunities and the effectiveness. Now, I'm not saying that public education isn't doing the best job that they've ever done, because they are. That's one of the things, is it seems like every time they set a new standard for public education and say, well, this is the bar you need to reach. Well, we reach it and they say, well, then that's not good enough, and then they put a new standard. And they put new testing, and no child left behind. Who's going to argue against the philosophical statement of no child left behind? But what we've been doing is leaving more and more behind.
Yeah, the 2003 agreement between the Department of Education and ECOT, do you have an opinion on why such an egregious agreement could have been arrived at?
It happens that the person that wrote that agreement replaced me as assistant superintendent of Buckeye Valley, so I've known him for years. And all I can say is he's pro-responsibility, pro-accountability, and I think when he made the statement, 5 hours of instruction per child, his intention was that a child would get 5 hours worth of instruction to receive that money. But he wasn't an English major. And so he didn't write it. The way it was written up was 5 hours of instruction needed to be offered, not that the student had to receive it. And ECOT's willing to hang their hat on the fact that if we offer 5 hours of instruction and the student gets 0, we're still entitled to the money. Shame on them.
So there seems to be a lack of integrity within the ECOT operation. There seems to be a lack of resolve on the part of state officials to correct this, what I would call chicanery. Now,
yes,
it would appear that somebody, in that contract, maybe there were some good intentions with that contract, but it would seem that during these 15 years or 13 years or so since that contract was signed, it would have seemed that some attorney general or some auditor or some state superintendent or some governor would have stepped in and said, this is theft in plain sight, and we can't tolerate it anymore. I mean, as a public official, as a career educator, how do you process that in your mind?
Well, I don't, because it's too frustrating and painful. I was personally a member of a group called the Eastern States Consortium of other school districts in other states, and we would get together once a year. In fact, they just met recently out in Upper Arlington. That's a member, and Newark City Schools is a member. And the other superintendents from the other states, when we talk about what's happening in Ohio, shake their head. Out of the other states that are in the Eastern States Consortium, none of the superintendents have to go out and beg the voters to pass operating issues and bond issues like we do in Ohio. Either their school board sets it, or they send it to the State Department of Education, the State Department approves it, or there are just a number of things. But they said it's an unnatural thing for people to go to the ballot box and say, I want to pay more taxes. And yet we're taking the very most important thing that we have in our society, the education of our children, and we're willing to put it at risk instead of taking the responsibility. And Bill, you understand, I mean, that's what the Supreme Court decision was all about, was the fact that the state legislature is responsible to provide thorough and efficient form of education through taxation, not the local taxpayers. The state is responsible, and they haven't done it. And they still aren't.
And the state officials have essentially thumbed their nose at DeRolf, the school funding case. The state essentially has created a license to steal, and ECOT has been stealing for 15 years. Is that a fair statement?
In my opinion, that's absolutely correct.
So how do we, what advice would you give? You're now retired, and from talking to you, you probably ought to get back into the business and take another superintendency. What would you say to superintendents that are starting their careers as superintendents, those that, well, all superintendents in the field? What advice would you give them with regard to trying at the local level to correct the abuses that are inherent in the charter school industry?
One, many of the superintendents in Ohio schools today have never known anything but charter and community schools. They don't know the days when we didn't have those. And again, I'm not trying to cause them to all go away, but they've just assumed that this lack of accountability and so forth is the way it is. And I would tell them that there's too many dollars at risk, too many children's education. We've got a political campaign going on right now for presidency that's beyond anything any of us have ever seen. And everybody talks about, how do we make our society better? Well, how do we make our society better? It's investing in the education of children. That is the number one thing. Whether you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, a teacher, a farmer, whatever, it's the education that makes that person able to reach their maximum potential. And yet we put education as the thing that's at risk.
Sometimes boards of education and even superintendents and other administrators in the public system will say, I really don't have a responsibility to do anything other than, what the law says I have to do. And if kids are going off to failing charter schools, then I don't have any responsibility. What would you say to that?
I would say if Rosa Parks hadn't violated the law to sit on the front of the bus, we wouldn't have some of the opportunities we have for all people in society today. I'm not advocating that anybody break the law, but I'm advocating that as school superintendents, boards of education, that they take their fiduciary responsibility to see that the money that's being spent and the accountability that they're under every day is the same for community and charter schools.
Good.